So, as the two of you that follow me on Twitter might have gathered by now, these past few weeks I've been busy touching grass. Prior to that, however, like many PC players, I've been touching grass in 13th century Tsushima. And I had a great time doing so actually. It's just a damn good grass, simply put. Not exactly a hot take, I know, cause well, there's a lot to like, such as the brilliant diegetic ways the game uses to help you navigate the world guided by wind, pillars of smoke or the wildlife. There's also the tight and responsive swordplay, faithfully capturing the samurai fantasy of true mastery of the blade, and of course a pretty great story that asks what are you prepared to sacrifice to protect your people, your friends, your family. Not that it's something novel and never done before, quite the opposite, and arguably with the main character literally named Jin, Compassion, you could say that him abandoning the old ways to save those around him is something you could see coming from miles away, but it just works really well here with the whole honor and Bushido code spin and some good old interpersonal drama sprinkled in. But I don't want to speak about any of that today. Instead, I'll tell you about one of my biggest gaming related pet peeves. But let's start from the ground up. Ghost of Tsushima, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, is an open-world action-adventure game set in feudal Japan on the island of Tsushima during the first Mongol invasion in 1274. It came out back in 2020 as a PlayStation exclusive, heralding the end of the PS4 era, trying and, in hindsight, succeeding at being a crowning jewel of sorts to close the generation. You're playing as Jin Sakai, a samurai who, in face of a new enemy with ruthless tactics, is forced to abandon the code of honor to help protect his people and retaliate against the invaders. Basically, Sucker Punch cleverly capitalized on the demand there was to have an Assassin's Creed game set in Japan and delivered before Ubisoft could. And it has to be said, they made a better product than Ubi would. Now, here comes my point. Nowadays, so many games are plagued by an abundance of arbitrary numbers. Being frank, not only do I feel a strong repulsion whenever a game obstructs my view with stupid damage figures or bores me with unnecessarily complex stat modifiers, I'm also of the opinion that in 9 instances out of 10 it's lazy and bad design and it could have and should have been handled differently. But for some reason, with the ascent of popularity of RPGs, way too many games seem to embrace this crap. We're at a point where things like player and enemy levels, superfluous itemization with countless tiers, anemic skill trees, the whole kit and caboodle, it gets shoehorned into games where it has no place just so the marketing can use it to attract a wider audience. One of these issues in particular has basically gained infamy in the gaming community.
Hey! Hey! Stop it! Hey, stop it! Hey, stop it! Don't make me kill you! Hey, stop it! Don't make me kill you!
I'll be honest with you, and I'm sure some of you will disagree with me on this, which is totally fine, but I don't think I've played a single game where I'd feel like there is an objective reason to utilize player and enemy levels and the damage scaling connected to it. Instead, every time I felt like it was a design shortcut, a way to cut corners to accomplish something that should have been achieved by different means. The same way I'm always opposed to seeing damage numbers, I want to see the damage I caused with my eyes, not just to be shown a pointless figure. I'm similarly against this whole level thing. If I've entered an area I'm not supposed to be in yet, and your answer as a game designer is to populate it with enemies that I cannot fight due to too big of a gap in our levels, you're cutting corners. Does it get the job done? Yeah, sure. Does it also create a heap of problems of its own? Sure does. The first casualty is always the suspension of disbelief. A lot of games are relying on deep player immersion. To achieve that, there has to be some sort of consistency in the rules of this virtual world. So when I shoot a guy's head with an assault rifle or cut his neck with a sword, the expectation is that he's not going to be feeling all that well afterward. If he walks it off just because there's a significant difference in our levels, It's hard to call that anything other than immersion breaking. On top of that, if your only tool to distinguish late game enemies from the early game ones is to inflate their HP like the price of groceries this past year, it isn't very exciting. You're fighting the same guys, except now they can tank more hits. The devs at Sucker Punch, to my delight, were well aware how catastrophic it would be for the samurai fantasy to be fighting enemies with bloated HP. They went out of their way to ensure that the combat always feels sharp, lethal and on a knife's edge. So in Ghost you won't find anything like RPG enemy levels. In addition to that, they were very careful not to fall into the trap of overinflating enemies' health pool. Now the question is, how do they manage that and still provide escalation and a sense of meaningful progression? Let's start answering that with a look at the world map. You can see it's differentiated into 3 main regions. These are unlocked organically at the beginning of each of the 3 story acts as Jin's counter-offensive against the Mongols moves further north. Once unlocked, the player is free to travel between the regions as they please. Now let's switch it up a bit. As you see now, we have 5 different areas in there. This time each of them represents a different enemy fraction. Sucker Punch approached this in a very smart way and used their character art as a guide to tweak the Mongol soldiers in different parts of the map. Instead of including health bars, how tough an enemy is communicated to you visually by simply looking at them and their armor with no need for additional UI elements. It also makes it possible to make a carefully calculated HP increase without it feeling gamey and breaking the immersion. It's understandable that a guy in full body armor is going to take more hits than a guy in a linen shirt. But it's not just more health that escalates the later encounters. With more enemies wearing helmets and protective masks, you suddenly can't just headshot them with your bow like you used to in the southern regions. And even the enemies themselves have a different spin to them in each of the areas. The intensity of combat is amplified by tweaking their aggression. The tougher looking guys have better poise, making it harder to break their guard. They strike harder, faster, and might use incendiary oil for extra damage. The archers will fire more quickly or use poison arrows. And all this is in complete unison with the world design. It's no accident the island has a few choke points in the form of fortresses that control strategic corridors. It ensures that you'll never be able to venture into parts of the map with enemies too tough. Furthermore, the evolution of the Mongol army's tactics is in itself a storytelling tool. Are the archers shooting faster? Well, that's because they've been trained in the Japanese way of the bow. Do they switch to poison arrows only after they found out about the poison from Jin? Are they wearing heavier armor? Yes, because they're in colder regions and are closer to the Khan, so you'd expect they're gonna be better trained. But this adaptation works both ways. The tougher the Mongols are, the more pressure there is on Jin to distance himself from the ways of the samurai and embrace the shadows like a ghost. This is some good fucking game design. When things work this well together and everything feels really tightly connected, you just know there are thousands of hours of brainstorming, iteration and playtesting behind it. I also want to point out that Ghost of Tsushima also does an exceptionally good job at preserving this balance and progression throughout a variety of difficulties. That's by no small part due to the fact that increasing difficulty doesn't just give the bad guys more HP and damage. In fact, it doesn't affect the enemy health pool at all and instead tweaks their aggression, makes the parry window less lenient, stuff like that. Well, that's not entirely true though, because one difficulty setting makes a change to the HPs. The opposite way though. Lethal is Ghost of Tsushima's hard mode, but instead of just making the enemies tougher, it makes the entire combat feel, like the name suggests, quite lethal. You can cut down the enemies in often as little as a single sword slash, but the same goes for you, where a single missed parry can be the difference between life and death. I love modes like this. I also really enjoyed The Last of Us Part 1's grounded mode when I played that last year, which is in a similar spirit. It's great. Especially in games like this that aim for gritty realism. It's not for everyone, not everybody's a fan of having a 40-second build-up to a duel only to have it be over in 15 seconds, but as a samurai cinema enjoyer, let's say, this is my kind of shit. What are your thoughts? Do you share my disdain for this, shall we call it, unnecessary RPGification we've been witnessing over the board for the past decade almost, I'm inclined to say? Or are you in the opposite camp and you're fond of it? Personally, I think Ghost of Tsushima is a great case study for how to provide escalation and progression in a lengthy open world game without falling into some of the pitfalls I've been talking about. Thank you for watching. If you're new to the channel, consider sticking around, and I'll leave you with links to some of my other videos on your screen and a wish of a pleasant day. Have a good one.
Saraba, 浪人。